Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi o te rā, g'day. I've been invited to talk about a community conservation project happening in a local Wellington landscape and the design kaupapa, or the philosophy that's transforming it into a new type of urban wilderness. This is Polhill Gully in Wellington, which comprises a bunch of reserves in Wellington's town belt. On the face of it, it isn't especially notable. It's a scrappy 70-hectare chunk of the town belt. It's a stone's throw from central Wellington. It heads up from Aro Street. It's surrounded by the suburbs of Brooklyn, Aro Valley and Highbury. So Brooklyn's kind of suburban, middle class. Highbury is public servants, university workers, Aro Valley's students, hippies. So it's a very kind of diverse Wellington community that surrounds the reserve. The hillsides are covered in regenerating forests, mainly scruffy gorse and mahoi, with a couple of older patches of kōtukutuku, which is the old tree fuchsia. And there's a century or more of people's junk in there. Te Papa could make an exhibition of the stuff that's found in those gullies. It was farmed around 50 years ago in the 60s and 70s, so it was originally where Wellington's milk came from. Why any dairy farmer would think about farming on those gullies is kind of madness if anyone's visited there. Maybe they pushed the cows down and had milkshakes. As a result of volunteer-built tracks, Pol Hill now hosts 1,000 visitors each week. We've got mountain bikers, runners, families, ramblers, dog walkers, students, and twitchers. It makes it one of the most popular spaces in the town belt, and the Transient or Highbury Fling mountain bike track is one of the most popular mountain bike trails in New Zealand, with 100,000 people clocked using it per annum. What makes Pol Hill pretty interesting or relevant to today's session is that these gullies are a meeting ground between people and some of the wildlife spilling over from Zealandia Ecosanctuary. Anne talked about Zealandia, and for those of you who aren't from Wellington, Zealandia is the first predator-proof fence sanctuary built anywhere in the world. So it's nearly 300 hectares that are covered in an 11-kilometre long fence that's designed to keep out a lot of the introduced predators, possums, mustelids, rats, that led to our endemic biodiversity being imperiled. And in particular, what makes Pol Hill interesting is some of the rare birds that have been spilling over that fence. When I grew up in Johnsonville and went to high school and university in Wellington in the 90s, the only birds I saw were mangy pigeons and blackbirds. And the only natives I saw, other than the odd wax-eye or fantail, was in wildlife docos like Wild South on TV. But on the back of spillover from Zealandia, plus 20 years of council possum control and widespread volunteer efforts, we know that this has changed dramatically. Tui are everywhere. When they put the fence up around Zealandia, they did a survey of the tui in Wellington. It was basically locally extinct. There were 6 pairs of tui found. Now there's probably 6 pairs of tui around your backyard if you happen to be a Wellingtonian. And kākā parrots are drinking on Cuba Street and enjoying local craft products. We got a report in today of a kākā seen down in Midland Park on Lambton Quay. And we've got karere, New Zealand falcon, nesting just above the beehive. And 2 years ago, something extraordinary happened in Pol Hill. A tīeke or saddleback nest was discovered just off a mountain bike track, about 3 metres off a mountain bike track. And to put this in context, a couple of generations ago, this bird was found on one island off Northland. A decade ago, the only time you would have seen a saddleback would have been visiting somewhere like Kapiti or Turimatangi. Effectively, it was exiled from the mainland. This is one of the chicks that hasn't been banded just yet, but and this is with one of the Zealandia Rangers, Matu Booth. And we followed these guys through to independence. It was the first time that tīeke had successfully bred in the wild on the mainland in over 120 years. And what's remarkable about that is that these birds were so vulnerable to the introduced predators that people brought with them to New Zealand that they were gone from the mainland 20 years before huia had disappeared. For those of you who aren't from New Zealand, the huia, along with the moa, is probably sadly our 2 most iconic extinct birds. This year we found a second nest, and each year since this was discovered in 2014, we've had juveniles breeding in Pol Hill, and the signs are promising for more. At the time, some of those people involved in rescuing these birds from the offshore islands, DOC and Wildlife Service rangers, were highly sceptical that it was even possible that they could survive to breed. They were expecting that these birds, like the hihi, the stitchbird and other birds, were doomed to live out their lives in exile on protected offshore islands. The mixture of the survival story, will these guys make it, and the unlikely urban location saw the trailblazing saddleback story go viral online. We had people tuning in each week, seeing if these guys were still alive. And then the other questions that we had were, where the hell is Pol Hill? People were expecting, Kapiti or Turituri or one of these offshore islands. And so when you Google Pol Hill, and it's 5 minutes from the top of Willow Street from downtown Wellington, it kind of raised a lot of eyebrows. It made local and international news. And this is the editorial from the New Year's Day of, I think this was the Dom Post. And I'm just going to quote a little bit from that. Now at a time when the world's biodiversity is dwindling rapidly, some scientists fear a sixth mass extinction of species has begun. A single bird can come to seem a victory. Let's hope for many more to come. Now its comeback, the saddleback's comeback in urban Wellington is certainly tenuous. We've had reports in the last couple of years from tīeke that have been victims of cats, dogs and stoats in Pol Hill, and even one that was the victim of kākā, a native falcon. So one endangered species having another endangered species for dinner. But the story of GBB, as the bird was banded, its coming of age was a singular proof of concept. The story kickstarted community interest in helping these Zealandia prison breakers out. And since then, we've been laying out the welcome map for these Aro Valley avian originals. And I think this is where it's especially relevant for this conference. There's kind of a new form of landscape design that we've been practicing. And it involves killing things. Last year, the volunteer trapping set up a couple of years earlier was seriously intensified. We got 160 DOC 200s, so they're the spring traps in the wooden boxes, and 30 of the Good Nature A24s, which are the new self-resetting traps, which we'll look at in a second. This hadn't been done before anywhere in an urban context, and it certainly hadn't been done by volunteers. We faced a lot of skepticism from bureaucracy, and they were asking questions like, what about health and safety issues? What if a kid puts their hand in a trap? Where are you going to get the traps from? Who's going to put them out? Where are you going to get your bait from? How sustainable is it? And citing Marco's spirit of bending a few rules, we just went ahead and did it. I remember the first meeting that we had with the council where the word had got out about these hundreds of wooden boxes that had just turned up in the landscape. And one of the councillors asked me with a wry grin, so where are the traps now, Paul? And I had to say that they were stored in a highly dispersed manner across Pol Hill. Our saving grace at that point was that none of the traps had been set, so technically I was telling the truth. The grid is the best practice muscled in rat control. Unlike other predator control grids laid over a map, our controlling dictum was accessibility to the conservation efforts. We didn't want to hide what we were doing or make conservation something that takes place in a national park or something that's outside of people's lived lives. So we wanted to make the mahi of looking after these species evident, and we wanted to invite others to join in. And one of the things that we did with the boxes, we got a graphic designer, Phil Kelly, to design our logo, which was the kind of Pol Hill protector. And it draws on a whole lot of Māori inspiration. It's a bird person. And when the boxes went into the landscape, it created this conversation. At this stage, we didn't have a website, we didn't have a social media presence, but people were curious about what this kind of Aotearoa bat signal meant and what these boxes were doing. Since that saddleback story galvanised volunteer interest in the project, we've now got over 50 trappers, over 5 lines. We've got office workers, grannies, mountain bikers, mountain biking grannies. Our youngest trapper is 6-year-old Lucy. Apologies to parents for encouraging tagging. This engaged group of Wellington wilder people coincided with the rise of social media. We now have over 500 people on our Facebook group page, and this is where the Pol Hill story becomes the 21st century conservation story. What started out as half a dozen trappers has evolved very quickly into a digital army of Pol Hill protectors. Oh, Mark, I should add, we've got a Finn as one of our trappers as well. Reports of saddleback and kākā encounters are complemented with a gallery of dead weasels and rats, and community members endorse trappers' efforts. This is from one of our trappers, Dan Henry. A teacher-only day meant these two intrepid trappers had plenty of time to clear and rebait traps on transient. Successful mission with several kākā given thanks by way of a ceremonial flyby. Now this is kind of remarkable because 3 or 4 years ago, if you'd asked anyone working in DOC whether Facebook posts of dead rats and weasels would be a major incentive to urban conservation, I think you would have been told to politely leave the building. And it's a provoking response to what Penny was talking about at the beginning around conversations about what conservation means and what a kaitiaki role means in a landscape. These conservation efforts led to innovation in the field. Our kid trappers have gamified the line checks using trap numbers to race each other. And we've got our kids to tag those stencils on those original boxes. That's a weasel on one of the boxes there. Mountain bikers have developed a tag system so they only have to get off their bike if a pink tag is pulled inside the box by a catch. Originally, because the traps are every 50 metres along the trails, it was very annoying if you were running or going for a mountain bike to get off every 50 metres and then unscrew the lid and check the traps. So again, it's a kind of innovation that's come from opening up the process to recreational usage. And we've partnered with the Brooklyn Trail Builders, the mountain bikers who built the tracks and opened up Pol Hill, to plant native trees in the reserve. And we've got tens of thousands of trees in over the last couple of winters. Backyard trapping in surrounding suburbs has kicked off. It's been happening in Highbury for just on a year and also kicked off in Brooklyn 6 months ago. And they've been initiated by members of the Pol Hill team. And there's a southern push that's about to happen towards the tip, which is heading towards Red Rocks in the south coast. And we've also caught some unusual stuff in our tracking tunnel surveys. All these efforts are supported by the City Council, Zealandia, Victoria and Massey universities on our doorstep. We've got design students and ecology students using Pol Hill as their wild laboratory. And the Department of Conservation, whose headquarters again is only a couple of minutes away down in Wellington, and we've invited local businesses to engage with their backyard. Newtown-based pest trapping innovators Good Nature, this is one of the self-resetting traps, are massive supporters and they supply our bait and traps, as is our local Garage Project brewery. Last year, a whānau of kākā parrots nested in the bush behind the brewery. And again, Anne talked about the kākā briefly, but these are birds that have effectively been extinct from Wellington for over a century. And it was pretty sweet where they were nesting behind the brewery, so we got in touch with Garage Project, and together we ran an online naming contest for the mum, and we got a local illustrator, Toby Morris, to draw the winner. And the winner was Cortina for the bush bogan coming back to the city. Part of our kaupapa behind the project has been to open up conservation again to artists and designers in our community, and we're working with Megan Raitt, who's here somewhere. Hi, Megan. On a nature trail where we'll be reaching out to use art to activate people to think about a space about Pol Hill in provoking ways. Last year it was announced that Aotearoa would be predator-free by 2050, and this year it was announced that Wellington City would aim to join that and be predator-free as well. And for lots of people, you might ask why. It seems like a kind of Trumpian goal to build fences and rid our islands of unwanted immigrants, a kind of make Aotearoa great again. People today have talked about that kind of concept of a return to Eden or a Zealandia. And in a way, I think, well, what Zealandia has done is incredible and has provoked a lot of these conversations. But I think what a thing like Pol Hill does in a living and working and playing environment is provides an answer through experience. We're in a unique position in Wellington because of that spillover boom from Zealandia. It provides a compelling, in-your-face answer to that question. These encounters aren't in a zoo or on a trip to an offshore island, but everyday encounters on your way to work, in backyards, and in our day-to-day lives. It's a story that the patrons of Pol Hill and Garage Project and Good Nature and all the people who've worked on the project, the trappers and the planters, have been quick to endorse. After all, we already enjoy the space and experience the booming birds and bush. Providing koha, or a kind of reciprocal thanks for this experience, is simple. We're not having to go out and sell the experience because people are already having it. And the biggest endorsement of the work are the manu themselves, the birds like kākā, which you might be interested to know is actually more threatened than the saddleback now, and this is the New Zealand falcon, and birds like hihi, or stitchbird. These guys, the kākā, nested just above the Prime Minister's house above Parliament this year, where if you were brave enough, you could go for a walk and get dive bombed as protecting its nest. And this again is another bird which hasn't done so well outside the fence, but you might be lucky enough to see in the wild a hihi, or a stitchbird. Again, it's been absent from the mainland of New Zealand for over a century. In Pol Hill and other halo zones in Wellington, the benefits aren't conceptual or abstract. You're not planting a tree that is going to take a generation or two to fruit. I think the 500-year vision of Zealandia is incredibly laudable, but the difference with an experience like Pol Hill is that when you check a trap, you get a tautoko or a cheers from a kākā, tōtuai, or tīeke. The connection is immediate and compelling. This is my daughter, Estella. The halo areas like Pol Hill and Wrights Hill outside the Zealandia are the only places in the world where you can go mountain biking with saddleback. And one day soon, I'm just going to tell a little anecdote. I had a friend come and meet us up in Pol Hill about 2 years ago, and he was mountain biking with his 4-year-old on his bike, and we heard a saddleback way down in a steep gully, and thought, oh God, it's miles away. And he said, hang on, I've got one of these toys. I don't know if anyone can see this. It's a little stuffed toy of a tīeke. And he played the toy, which sure enough, about 10 seconds later, the tīeke came along to the mountain bike track to say g'day. And I don't know if unless you guys have kids, you're probably not familiar with this range, but the rest of the toys in this range are kākā, tākehei. They're birds that are effectively, there's 120 odd kākā left. There's tākehei. They're birds that you have to go and visit a sanctuary or a distant recovery island to see them. Yet this was, 5 minutes from downtown Wellington. Hopefully one day soon we'll be able to do the same thing with kiwi and kōkākā, and there are plans that are happening quite fast in terms to get kiwi back into Wellington's backyard. So if there are any lessons from Pol Hill, especially with relevance to this conference, I think the possibility of Pol Hill is that native wildlife, people and pets can get on peaceably. And there are a heck of a lot of challenges. We've had conversations about cats and dogs on leads. But our kaupapa has to be positively neighbourly with our natives. This isn't a zoo or an offshore island. It's a place for living, working and playing in. So kia kākā, go native in Aotearoa Valley. Cheers.
A Garage Project on a Garage Sunday. It's something that we've done once a month for a while, and this time we thought we'd take the opportunity to really celebrate Polhill Reserve and get them some support for getting the native birds up there. It's such a great space and it's important to preserve that.
Dogs on leads get a little doggy bag with some swag from Garage Project, Mashbone, doggy biscuits. We've got SPCA poo pickup bags, Fix and Frog peanut butter vouchers, some Zealandia entry vouchers, and a bandana designed by local Aotearoa artist Stephen Templar, which is Take the Lead, Save a Saddleback, and it's a pretty sweet design on it.
We support events like the Garage Sunday just because it's great to get out and meet our neighbours, meet the people that are the new kaitiaki or caretakers of these species as they leave the sanctuary.